All right, this week on the Punks on Pizza podcast, it's a true pleasure to have multi-instrumentalist, producer, founder behind ugEXPLODE Records, also founder of the Flying Luttenbachers, and Lydia Lunch's right-hand man in Retrovirus, the one and only Weasel Walter.
Hello, I appear through the veil of mysteriousness, which is my blurry cell phone lens. How you doing?
Good, good. I welcome you through the wheeze fog.
Yeah, well, me and technology, I'm a bit of a, I don't know, what would you say? I don't know if I'm an anachronist, but smartphones eluded me for so long. This is my first smartphone. I got it maybe a year ago or something. I've already replaced the screen 3 times, and I insisted on doing it myself, of course. Right now, there's some kind of like weird dust between the lens. I've always been into using simple tools to make the most complex results. So I don't know, this is everything's a metaphor within an allegory within so my smartphone is already a broken, destroyed husk of technology, and I think maybe some of my music resembles that in a way.
Well, I did hear in an interview that you take musical inspiration from Jack Kirby. So it is quite possible that things could be askew.
Yes, well, I always say that Jack Kirby is one of my musical influences, which, of course, if anyone doesn't know who Jack Kirby was was an incredibly prolific comic book artist starting in the 1930s and sort of having his golden period in the 60s and 70s with these incredibly sort of distorted and heroic, bizarre, exotic musculature that doesn't exist, and insane complex machines and aliens and all the stuff. And his strange, chunky, hyper extended style, I would like to think that some of my music resembles his approach in art, in visual arts. So yeah, huge influence in terms of making your own cosmology and filling things up with crazy details and exaggerating everything into a larger than life kind of ferment. So yeah.
All right, but yeah, before the interview, you asked me which way we were gonna wipe this, from front to back or back to front, and
Exactly.
I must admit that against all medical advisory, I do like to go from back to front.
All right, well then I concede your demand, and why don't you lead with a question and we'll see where this goes.
All right, you know what, just before we get into the Flying Luttenbachers, I was curious, was there anything before moving to Chicago? Was there a high school band, or was there anything before there that maybe didn't get recorded but was out playing shows?
To nutshell it, there was a sort of hardcore punk scene in my hometown of Rockford, Illinois, in the 80s, and I was semi-involved with it. I wouldn't say I was in the center of it, but the scene was small enough that everyone kind of knew each other, and we had 3 great used record stores, and I was a lonely dork, so I would go to the library and I would look up information on all these crazy bands that I was hearing about, and then voila, I would go to one of the 3 record stores and buy the record I just read about as a cutout for $1.99, $2.99, and the whole thing it was like being at the right place at the right time. Also, there was the USA Network had a TV show on weekends called Night Flight that was extremely influential to me. That's where I was seeing things like Ladies and Gentlemen, the Fabulous Stains, and Eraserhead, and like all these like cult movies and cult music. It's where I found out about The Residents, like on TV on Friday night. So, I just put all these threads together and looked for the coolest stuff I could find and the most crazy, bizarre art I could find. And it turned out I was onto something. I don't know. I was listening to free jazz and no wave and all this kind of crazy stuff in high school. And for me, it was an extrapolation, like starting punk as the sort of like ground zero, and then just getting weirder from there and going out in all different directions. I always thought that the 60s free jazz stuff was kind of like the black punk of its day, and I could relate to the iconoclasm. So to me, it was like a similar vibe or something, and it was easy for me to make this crossover from, you know, kind of like 3-chord punk or hardcore into, you know, something more esoteric like free jazz. So I didn't see this thing as a dilettante thing, like now I'm being free jazz and now I'm being punk or whatever. I always thought that I was just synthesizing everything at the same time, and it all came from the same sort of starting point. So I don't know. I like 20th century modernism, actually. I'm reticent to call myself a postmodernist because I think so much postmodernism offends me, but I guess by definition, maybe I am a postmodernist because of what I just told you. But, you know, I love 20th century classical music at its most dissonant and obtuse. And to me, that's like the modernism I'm into. And I sort of apply those criteria to everything I do in a weird way, even though I come out of like a rock and roll background and, you know, played free jazz. I don't know. I'm a hot mess. You know, I'm just like an aesthetic synthesizer. I just took everything I liked and I just churned it back out into my language, artistic language. So the question was, any bands before the Flying Luttenbachers? Yeah, I had sort of crappy garage bands that didn't really do anything. I mean, I had a band in high school called the Javelin Bats with my 2 best friends, and we used to do no wave covers. We did like the Contortions and Flipper and Eight-Eyed Spy and all this kind of stuff like this. But you know, you're talking about a bunch of 16-year-old kids, and back then the technical bar for playing instruments was a lot lower. I mean, we stunk. We were awful. I mean, maybe it was authentic no wave as such. I mean, it seems like the kids these days, the bar is so high, like they can just play anything, and they've had like the best training and they have the best instruments. We were just scrapping together whatever we could. So I think that kind of getting your hands dirty aesthetic always appealed to me and still appeals to me. I would rather make something, you know, like I said, I would like to make something complex with simple tools rather than, you know, be buried in gear and options and come up with a bunch of, you know, technological toilet paper. You know, it's basically worth nothing. It's see-through. So I don't know. I don't consider myself a natural, and the growing pains of my bands in high school definitely revealed that I had a long way to go, but I was really eager. So, you know, I aspired to move to the big city, and I wound up moving to Chicago to go to school in 1990. And that was basically I count that as the beginning of my actual career, because that's when I started being in bands that could actually play shows and pull off what they were doing and move forward. And really the Flying Luttenbachers, I guess, was kind of my first real serious band. And we formed that in, I guess, fall of 1991, like late 1991. And here it still is today.
And look at that. Look how well this segues, eh? I wanted to ask about that first year with the Flying Luttenbachers and co-founding that with Hal Russell before the 7-inch was recorded. I noticed when looking into this that there was quite an age gap between yourself and Hal Russell. So I was curious how the music had changed before that and then afterwards with Ken blanking on the last name.
Vandermark, yeah. Well, I guess I always see these things as a pretty linear progression, even if nobody else sees it, because it's through my gaze, obviously, and it's happening to me. But my passion, I really wanted to play free jazz so badly. I was very influenced by free jazz, and I worked very diligently to try to be some sort of free jazz drummer when I was a teenager. And Hal Russell, who's been deceased since almost 30 years now, it turned out he was an instructor at the college I was going to in Chicago. So I hooked up with him as quickly as I could. We basically just started jamming, and he liked my spirit, you know, because I like to play fast, crazy drums. And he was originally a drummer, but he took up saxophone at one point, and he was really into Albert Eiler, and he liked to just blow and play high energy free jazz. So we got along pretty good. We both had a kind of like irreverent sense of humor, and we got along pretty good initially. So he suggested we start a group, and I think for him it was more of like a beta testing thing, you know, like a B team, you know, as opposed to his other groups which were more established. I was very young. I was 19. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to get a gig. I didn't know, like, making a record seemed like a fantasy that was just far enough out of reach. I couldn't grab it. And I started working at a record store in Chicago. And at one point, the manager said, "Hey, why don't we make a Flying Luttenbachers record?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I went to Hal and I was like, "Hey, we can make a record. Let's make a record." And he goes, "Well, how much does it pay?" And I was like, "What?" Like, pay? You know, I had no idea what he was talking about. Homeboy wanted to get paid because there was like some jazz thing, and I was just confused. And basically he sort of said to me on the phone, "Well, if I don't get paid, I'm not going to make the record." And I just like I was crestfallen. I remember just going, "Oh, my big chance to make a record has just been destroyed," like in 5 minutes, basically. And what I did was my gears got turning. And I remembered this guy that I'd played with in an Anthony Braxton workshop orchestra a year ago. He was kind of the only other guy in the orchestra that seemed really into free jazz. It was my age group. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, Ken, you want to come make a record?" And he said, "Sure." So we basically set up a 4-track at this place where I was working, doing sound for kind of like free jazz and improvised music and new music bands and stuff like that. And we recorded our first 7-inch on a lowly 2-track tape recorder, cassette recorder.
Nice.
And pretty soon there were 300 7-inches with, you know, the Flying Luttenbachers name on it. And that thing, I mean, one of these days I got to pull that out and play that. I mean, that just is like ancient history. It's like pulling out a rusty Matchbox car or something and looking at it. That was so long ago. I don't know how many times my cells have replaced themselves, but it's really hard for me to relate at this point very directly to the 19-year-old me. I mean, I see what it was and I know it was me, but I was so feral and I was trying so hard and I had so far to go. I'm certainly not embarrassed by these records. I find them quaint. I think they're kind of like cute given the context, but I'm not romantic about that time at all. It was a lot of struggling and me kind of learning things the hard way and, you know, just trying to make things happen. And I don't know. I think, you know, it's like any art. People can appreciate whatever they want out of it. For me, it's just kind of like inconsequential at this point, but it's it was the beginning of a band. So for what it's worth. So yeah, the original band was 2 saxophones and drums, which is a pretty unconventional lineup, I think. And we were trying to play these short, weird, kind of slightly mathy, no wave-ish songs with crazy saxophone solos and free drumming and all this stuff. And, you know, it was very primitive at first. Kept adding more people to the band and wound up making, you know, the first couple of records, Constructive Destruction, Destroy All Music, which were a little more well thought out, a little more varied. You know, there's guitar and bass added to the band. We had a couple saxophone players. We had me on drums. You know, I think this whole thing was me just figuring out how the hell to do this at all. And then death metal bit me in the ass and I fired the whole band. And then I got a new band with a bunch of my friends and we started incorporating blast beats and pentagrams and just sheer walls of noise. It was a much less painterly sound than the previous sort of jazz inclined group. And that was death metal changed my life. I mean, it kind of came when I needed it and showed me the way, the left-hand path. I think Satan is amusing. I don't believe there's actually a Satan or a devil per se. It's more of an embodiment of maybe contradiction or resistance or contrariness. And at the time, I definitely was very contrary. So the whole idea of satanic death metal, like Deicide and Morbid Angel and stuff like that, just really clicked with me. I still love that stuff today. I listen to so-called brutal death metal all the time. I mean, it all sounds the same, but it's just like, it's sort of like free jazz in a way. You just sort of let it, you let it go through your brain and you process it however you want to process it. And some of it just comes and goes instantly and you're just left with the feeling or the energy or whatever. So I don't know. In the 90s, I tried to do as much as I could. I was in other bands like Lake of Dracula. I played with a guy named Bobby Kahn a lot. I'm on a couple of his records, did tours with him. He was kind of like an ironic, like persona, like glam rock, Christian entertainer, bizarre, weird cult figure. His early records, I think, are pretty interesting and worth checking out. At least the ones I'm on are. I was doing a lot of improvised music. I organized an improvised music workshop at a bookstore in Chicago in 1994 that up until the epidemic was still running, even though I haven't had anything to do with it since 1995, really. Yeah, the 90s was a lot of surviving and trying to do the best I could with very limited resources. But, I hacked out a lot of crude, raw, weird little records. And, I wouldn't go back in time, but I guess that was what needed to happen. And I did it. So
By the time that first 7-inch was released, was what you referred to as the Chicago no wave scene in full swing yet?
1992, when we made that, no. In fact, when we made that record, we didn't know who our peers were at all. The first handful of gigs that the Flying Luttenbachers played in 1992 were basically us, kind of jazz style, doing 2 sets at this club called Club Lower Links in Chicago. And I mean, we didn't even know there were any other bands we could play with. We were just kind of like, okay, well, we're just going to be this band that just plays. And eventually, I guess we started drawing an audience because at that point, free jazz per se was not very popular in Chicago. It had kind of receded, like any interest that was there. I mean, there was stuff happening. It was largely a somewhat racially segregated scene at the time, kind of divided between the north side and the south side. And I don't know, it just kind of caught on. I think it was novel for people that young people were trying to play kind of hardcore free jazz. So we started drawing a little crowd, but then I guess I started meeting people in the neighborhood I was living in. I lived in a neighborhood called Wicker Park, which is now extremely gentrified. And, by the late 90s, it was already gentrified to hell. But at that time, me and my 4 buddies were, renting an apartment for $500 a month. So it was $135 each, which is like pretty much unheard of now.
Oh, yeah.
It was a real Lord of the Flies situation, but we had a lot of laughs and a lot of crazy stuff happened. But I started going out in the neighborhood and running into people and seeing flyers, and I would also put up flyers. I mean, that was back when I would paste flyers to the wall with like Elmer's glue. And I mean, I can't even imagine, it's not even tolerated anymore in the cities. You kind of can't do that. It's basically, that's a pay to play thing now, or you'll get they'll call the cops on you. So, I mean, that stuff was real rogue back in the 90s. And I think it was just kind of inevitable that I met other weirdos in the scene, people like Quintron, the Scissor Girls, people like this. Me calling that scene Chicago no wave was a little controversial. Some people didn't like that because they thought it was a retro term and thought it was pigeonholing all the bands in a way that they didn't want to be pigeonholed. But for me, I just saw it as very analogous. It was a lot of interesting individuals sort of doing crazy stuff, and it was a scene. There were literally a bunch of bands in the area, and we'd all play shows together and do stuff like that. So for me, it was kind of knee-jerk marketing to call it no wave, you know, Chicago no wave. I figured, why not?
Kind of Lux Interior with the psychobilly term.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, Lux Interior did cross over to the New York no wave. I mean, I know Lydia Lunch used to go see the Cramps, and she was actually going to be their drummer for a hot minute. And you know, she has slept with several members of the Cramps historically. So, I mean, there is like a connection there. But you know what? That's the thing, is no wave isn't a style; it's an approach. So, I mean, maybe the early Cramps were a kind of no wave approach to rockabilly. I don't know. The jury's out. I don't really care, but that's grist for the mill. People could talk about that all day if they wanted to. I just thought no wave was an approach of deconstructing music, you know, especially rock music or jazz. And I just thought our bands we were looking at the forums and deconstructing them and making them into something weirder and more personal and nihilistic. And, you know, there's a huge black humor element in all these bands. So to me, it seemed analogous. No one was really trying to be no wave, you know, whatever. In fact, pretty much everybody but me was specifically trying not to be no wave. So, you know, it's sometimes these terms, like these marketing terms or these idiomatic terms, in the case of a New York no wave, those bands didn't make that up. They didn't care if they were seen as a scene or an idiom or a genre or anything like that. The no wave thing, as far as I can tell through my extensive research, was a tag that came out of the press. And it was a joke that a lot of people had kind of had in the air. Like everyone, there's like this contest to figure out who called it no wave first. And I think everybody called it no wave first because it was a joke on new wave. It's like, instead of new wave, it's like, it's no wave. So, you know, all this etymology of all this kind of crap is real blurry. It's like my camera lens. So, you know, it's like, well,
I think,
you know, I know my position, but I can't, anybody else who has a different position, that's for them. And, you know, if you ask somebody else about the Chicago no wave, you're going to get a different answer. If you ask somebody about the New York no wave, you're going to get a different answer. That's the rich tapestry of life, I guess.
Well, I mean, my 2 cents on the no wave thing, I think a lot of that would have come from that compilation, right? No Wave New York. And I think the powers behind that put that together are mostly responsible for that term even making it to the masses.
Sure. Well, you know, all those bands were active before No New York was made. It was recorded in it was recorded in, God, I should know this, in fall 1978, and it was done really quickly, and it actually came out in November 1978. And I helped moderate the No Wave group at Facebook, and there's some extreme nerds there, and we're really kind of anal about getting this stuff right. And also we have access to some of the people who are actually on that record and people who are in the scene. So it's, you know, there's somehow we're trying to get the truth out, but it seems like the term no wave really didn't appear in the press until around the time No New York came out. And arguably that was almost the end of most of those bands, like in their original forms anyway. So it's almost like no wave was a posthumous term, you know, and then people turned it into an idiomatic term where it's like, we're playing no wave. It's like disco with crazy guitars on top or whatever, you know, whatever people perceive no wave to be. It's all well and good, you know, like I don't own the term and I don't have that much skin in the game at this point. I was always a fan, and I just see it as, well, my music is just deconstructions of a lot of other conceptual things. You can call it no wave, or you can say it's not no wave. It really doesn't make any difference. Music is still there, and it still does what it does. So I don't get into arguments about what is or isn't no wave very much, because I think it's a rather pointless discussion. And having rotated the cube and looked at it from so many angles, I just see that all it was a bit of an arbitrary term applied to a historical scene that kind of turned into an idiomatic thing later on, and it has its own life, and it just, that's what it is. It's very vague.
I wanted to ask you about the early years with the Flying Luttenbachers. What was the first big tour with them, and how far did you go?
Well, we did a very short 5-day tour in 1994, and it was okay. We didn't really know what we were doing, but it was okay. I would say the first real touring we did, the first serious tour was 1998 in Europe, where we did 33 shows in 35 days or something insane like that. I mean, that's almost unimaginable now. You couldn't even get 33 days if you wanted, if you tried. Like, you couldn't even get them, or if you could, they would suck. It would be very painful. But we basically were real eager, and the Luttenbachers band that did the Revenge and Gods of Chaos records, we were everyone's like, go to Europe. So we did this crazy long tour, and it was actually fairly prosperous. We got on German TV, like primetime German TV, and like all this crazy stuff. So that was kind of when, I guess, it was starting to maybe seem like this was a real thing. Like this was really happening, like my rock and roll dreams were coming through. But ultimately it was a lot of hard work and somewhat painful, and we learned a lot the hard way. I mean, guys like me, I did not do much the easy way, so I don't know. It's that sort of DIY thing is the core of who I am and what I do. And I don't know, that's an ethos, and people can kind of take it or leave it, but it's raw.
I hear you. DIY is where the spirit lies. Like when I was booking, I booked before these shows, I booked live shows, and I would book acts that would be peculiar for your average punk rock show, but it was just the DIY spirit that I admired. One guy in particular, a harmonica player with a stomp box who would spit all over himself and scream the blues, just great stuff.
Sure. Well, it goes back to this whole idea of the ethos of no wave. It's like an approach, not a genre. I think you're talking about the exact same thing I was talking about, which is like, does this click check any of the boxes? Yep, it does. So throw it in.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Now, I heard you refer to the call to play with Lydia Lunch as the bat signal, and answering that. I was just curious, what did that look like, that incident when you got that call? How did that come to be?
Well, frankly, I made that call, not vice versa. So I'll explain how that went down. As I said, I was kind of a nerdy scholar of the no wave thing, the historical no wave thing, for a long time. And I was seen sort of as kind of an expert by certain people, for what it's worth, that it's neither here nor there to be called an expert as far as I'm concerned. But I know a lot about the topic. And at one point, pre-internet, I had a lot of lines on information that people couldn't just Google up. So I think Lydia had kind of heard about me through the grapevine at certain points. And, like I saw her play in 1991, and she stormed out of a club before I could be like, hello, I'm Weasel Walter, or whatever. But basically, when I was living on the West Coast in the mid 2000s, towards the end of my stint there, maybe 2008, 2009, something like that, probably 2008, we heard that Teenage Jesus was going to play in town, and I was like, that's my gig. So I was playing in a band called Burmese at that point, and Burmese is kind of like the offspring of no wave. It's just kind of like White House, Swans, Napalm Death, ugly, 2 drummers, 2 basses, totally ridiculous, extreme vocals. And I was like, we have to open. And we got the gig, and we opened, and we killed it. And the funny thing was, all these fuddy-duddies who came to see Teenage Jesus, a totally uncompromising, irritating, dissonant band, they couldn't handle Burmese. They were literally like, boo, this is horrible. And I was like, you know what? Fuck all you. You don't get it at all. But I looked over and guess who was watching the band from the side of the stage? Lydia. So we had the stamp of approval from her. So everyone else could sit and spin as far as I was concerned. Like it was just hypocritical. So I didn't really care, but we played our asses off. We had a good gig. And, Lydia and I didn't really keep in touch, but at one point a few years later, a friend of mine called and he said, hey, Lydia's looking for a guitar player. She just asked Chris Connolly. He doesn't want to do it. And I guess she had asked Paul Leary from Butthole Servers. He didn't want to do it. Basically, I don't know. She wanted to do this thing and everyone was turning her down. And I just stepped up and I said, yo, Lydia, it's Weasel. Remember me from Burmese? She's like, yeah, sure. I was like, I'm your guitar player. And she's like, ha ha ha, okay. Well, I want to try out these other people first, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I just shook my head and was like, all right, go watch this video of me playing with my band Cellular Chaos. I'm your guitar player. She basically went back watching and was like, yeah, you're in. It's cool. So, that was 10 years ago. And originally Retrovirus was meant to be kind of a one-off. It was a band put together specifically for an art opening in LA. And the concept was to just play a bunch of her old material and do a retrospective, but it caught on and the vibe was good. And that thing has gotten better and better throughout time. We played, in a way, I'm the band director and I picked a lot of the songs and I kind of manage the sonic aspects of it so she can just be herself. And it's been a great job. It's been a real crazy trip. We played all over the world and partied hard and it's hilarious. It's amazing. So don't know, it was just me, like the moon and the stars aligning. Like sometimes that stuff happens. It's inexplicable. Sometimes you're just at the right place at the right time, or you find a way of being at the right place at the right time. I don't know, maybe it was 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but I just stepped up and I had the confidence and I was ready to do it. And I got the job and that's what we do. We're still doing it. We just played 3 shows in Texas. We have like a festival gig in Calgary, maybe one in Mexico, like the phone still rings and we still go and we rock and it's a good gig. If you would have asked the 14-year-old me if I would have been playing with Lydia Lunch, I would have said, hell yes, I am. I would, even if no one else thought I would. I was just like, yeah, of course. That attitude of like, these are real people and you can meet them. They may not want to be your best friend or anything, but these are real people that exist in the world. And, you can contact these people and try to connect with them and maybe work with them. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a bunch of people whose records I grew up listening to. And there's next waves of peers coming up. And I don't know, it's a cyclic thing. I'm just part of the continuum. That's the way I see it.
What was, sorry, we were talking about getting together with Lydia Lunch. What was that first jam experience like with Retrovirus? And what did you go in like? What were you just vamping? Were you guys doing covers that you had to learn? What was the intention? Was there ever talk of writing a new album, or was it just for that art show that you had talked about?
I think I don't remember if I did suggest some of the songs, I believe, and Lydia had some ideas of songs that she wanted to play. It was all stuff from her career, sort of mostly in the 80s, generally. And I showed up at the first rehearsal and it was a bit controversial that I got this job. I was kind of hearing through people in the grapevine, they were like, who's this guy? Who's this Weasel Walter guy? And I was kind of like, fuck you, I'm going to show you who I am. Sit and watch, like you who haven't made a good record in 30 years. sit back and watch, like, so, I was getting a little negative feedback from actually having gotten this position, because other people thought like some sort of OG should have gotten it, but they all turned her down. She asked a lot of those people. So I went in prepared. I mean, I knew all the songs like back of my hand at the first rehearsal, and we went in and, we kind of hacked it out. At one point, there was a bit of tension between me and one of the other band members, because I guess I was trying to move a little faster than he was, and he did not want his style cramped. So there were a few cross words from him towards me, but ultimately, Lydia had my back on that, so it was fine. I mean, there's no spilled milk over this situation. It's purely anecdotal. Like, I'm totally good with this guy. Like, whatever. It's all good. But my only point was just this whole thing of like, who's this Weasel Walter guy? Who does he think he is? He's like, well, I'm fucking Weasel Walter. That's who I am. So check it out. So whatever. We did that first tour, and it was real scrappy. We actually did put out a CD from one of the shows, and it's okay, but I think that band really became a terror, later on, like when we started becoming a more regular band and touring more often, especially when Tim Dahl joined on bass. It turned into a roving gang of pirates, buccaneers, and I don't know. The show has gotten, it's pretty insane. I mean, Lydia lets me do whatever I want, so I go totally batshit nuts. And lately I've been sort of inspired by 1970 footage of the Who, like Isle of Wight, Live at Leeds, like this kind of stuff. And it's funny because I never patterned myself on it, but I think Retrovirus almost has that kind of weird vibe where it's like a motley crew of four bizarre characters just doing this thing and creating this energy together. And, somebody told me I play the guitar like I'm trying to beat it up. I accept that as a compliment. Yeah.
I can see that.
So I don't know. We played hundreds of shows. It's still going. I still find my motivation. I've never been tired of the band. I don't think anyone, it's a great rock and roll band. Love the people. It's great to do. That's what it is,
Now, the live album you're talking about, was that the one from 2013 that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
All right. How was the reception to that album when it was released, and how do you feel about it today?
It sold pretty well. Part of the reason to make it was, one, I wanted to have a Lydia Lunch record on my own label. Two, we needed something to sell on tour. So there we go. We had an album. It was like, here's the band, here's the record. So, we sold a good amount of those things, and, made money to keep the project going and to keep food in our mouths and all that. And I mean, I haven't listened to it in years at this point. It is a 2-track recording that I did with my own Sony D50, like on stage on a tripod, or maybe it was backed by the sound desk. I don't really remember, but it's clear. It sounds like a band playing music. And I think those arrangements have come a long way and gotten more sophisticated and nuanced, but for what it was, I think it was a good raw representation of her musical ethos. I think it was in line with it. I don't know, the project got better as it went along, in my opinion. And that's, I think a lot of bands should be that way. So sometimes they get worse, but whatever.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
At the end of 2014, it looked like in one afternoon, the album Urge to Kill was recorded. Is that correct?
Yep.
I was curious, with that album leaning a bit more onto the Roland S. Howard material, did you have to tweak your gear setup at all? I know you had said you don't like to be drowned in gear, but he had those 2 infamous pedals. I was wondering if you had to switch it up at all.
Not really, but I think when I'm trying to think if we made that record, if I had the Epiphone Firebird yet, because the whammy bar is kind of essential for that Roland sound. I probably had it. I can't remember off the top of my head. I haven't listened to that record in a long time either. But um, you know, the whole thing of like that sort of like drowning and reverb sound and the whammy bar, and then my secret weapon was the, you know, the delay pedal feedback nightmare, kind of like vacuum cleaner sort of repeating onslaught thing. That was my interpretation of his sort of approach. And, you know, I'm not trying to sound like Roland S. Howard per se, but I'm trying to incorporate the vibe and the feel and the mood of what he was doing. Because, you know, in a lot of ways, Retrovirus, we're not trying to play these exactly perfect renditions of the thing that's already happened. We try to like look at the song and the performance and just really encapsulate it and then do it our own way so that it's modernized, like it's up to date, even though it still contains the core principles of, you know, these classic recordings and performances. So there's a lot of, you know, there's some reverence to the originals for sure.
Now, with the band Flying Luttenbachers, it definitely feels like there was some Sonic Youth influence, and I want to know, how was it getting to jam and play with like Thurston Moore and Bob Burt?
There's not a lot of Sonic Youth influence in the band per se. I mean, I listened to Sonic Youth when I was younger. You know, they were definitely in the mix, but I think that Sonic Youth were sort of maybe the popularized like distillation of a lot of cultural touch points. And I think I was more in tune with the original influences that Sonic Youth drew from rather than Sonic Youth themselves. I mean, they're all well and good. I mean, I've been on tour with those people. I kind of know some of them better than others. You know, what Sonic Youth does, people like it. That's all good. But I think I was sort of more, you know, like I was more into Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, and I was more into Albert Eiler, and I was more into Deicide or whatever. So, you know, I think the Flying Luttenbachers, what we might have in common with Sonic Youth is our use of dissonance, but I would say that the Flying Luttenbachers are much more dissonant than Sonic Youth generally is, even though maybe in their early incarnations, they definitely were pretty noisy and crazy. So what's it like to play with those people? Cool. You know, like Bob's been in the band almost the whole time, and he's Bob Burt. He's a legend. He was also in Pussy Galore, and they were kind of my favorite band, contemporary band in the late 80s. I kind of didn't really like many bands at that point, but Pussy Galore were just knocking out of the park over and over again. So, you know, it's cool to work with these people as peers. You know, it's satisfying. It makes me feel like I'm part of the continuum that I talked about earlier. You know, like I've done some things with Thurston, hung out with him, and it's all well and good. You know, we have a good time when we see each other, and it's great. You know, I don't invest too much in the stardom factor of any of this, because I think that's very relative. And I think it's more important for me to, although I am a fan a lot of times with these people, I think it's important to relate to them as, you know, like a peer, like respectfully as a peer, and they can kind of take that or leave it. You know, some of them leave it, but I'm not really interested. Some of them are, and that's all well and good. You know, I just go in and try to add what I can add at face value, and try to be fun and a good musician and a conversationalist and whatever. You know, I don't know. It's I've had the fortune of playing with a bunch of people that I grew up listening to, and I wouldn't say I feel lucky, because I feel like that was what I was supposed to be doing the whole time. It wasn't luck, really. It was, I've always been trying to be a part of, you know, this cyclic thing of influence, and, you know, one musician influencing another, and just the whole circular Ouroboros of influence and stuff like that. So I always, you know, I always wanted to be part of this, and I am. So what can I say? I mean, there's somebody out there, I don't even know who it is, who's probably, my work has had a lot of impact on them, and I may never meet them in my entire life, but that's kind of how influence works. Maybe you never know, maybe you don't know directly what your influence is, but I just do these things on good faith. I make the art that I want to make and the art that I like, and some people like it, and that's kind of how I see it. So working with my peers is great. I've worked with a lot of awesome people, and it's great. And I hope to work with more of them. So.
I think it's funny you're talking about not investing too much in the whole stardom of things. And
Yeah.
my recollection of Bob Burt when you guys played Toronto in 2017 was coming in later than everybody, and then as soon as the set was done, like grabbing his jacket and just flying out of the bar, gone while everybody was still unloading. Is that correct, or am I mistaken in that memory?
This is more like a question for Tim Dahl, because he would probably remember exactly the dynamic. I mean, sometimes there's a little drama in this band. I mean, like any band, there's usually some kind of drama. So who knows? I'm sure there's probably some reason. That doesn't sound like Bob particularly. So that might have been like something might have been going on at that point. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I bet if you asked Tim Dahl, he would remember. In fact, I will ask him and get back to you, because maybe there was something weird going on. I don't know. But most of the time, Bob is really laid back, and he's, I mean, he likes to play the concerts and whatever. He'll hang out. I don't know. He's a lot older, so I mean, me and Tim are in our, late 40s, and Bob is, he's pushing 65 or something like that. So, there's an energy thing. I mean, Bob isn't going to rage as hard as the little boys in the band, just out of, it's better if he doesn't, because, if he gets too tired, kind of a train wreck. So it's good for Bob to get his rest. That's how I think.
I always forget that Lydia is half Canadian. Do you ever see it in her?
Well, yeah, her dad was Canadian, and there's a love-hate relationship with her father, which is well documented, and not safe for work for the most part. That wasn't a very good relationship, but she has tried to put a spin on it where there's actually things about her father that she believes have helped her with her success, or her confidence, or her motivation, stuff like that. So, if she chooses to see it that way, great. Like if that helps her to see things that way, awesome. Her dad, man, that's just like a whole Freudian discussion, like waiting to happen, that we don't even have time to get to. But I mean, it's somewhat well documented in her work, so none of this is I'm not letting any cats out of the bag or anything like that. But the whole topic of Lydia Lunch and her father, that's maybe something that the listener will go research and maybe not like what they find out. But I don't know. Canadian, I mean, that's a good question. I'll think about that. I feel like that has been brought up on occasion, but I don't really remember what happened. Good question, though.
All right. After the Retrovirus show, we were talking, you and I, very briefly, were talking about the Lydia Lunch spoken word gig that was at Cherry Cola's the year before. And you were talking about how that's a completely different ball of wax in comparison.
Oh, yeah.
I was just curious about how you approach a tour like that, where you're behind half a drum kit and a synth board, as opposed to the full-on Retrovirus tour.
Well, Lydia has been a great cheerleader for many, many artists, like of many different disciplines. And she's always like tried to push my agenda, like, hey, you fuckers, look at this guy. He's pretty awesome. Like, check him out. And that's nice. It's like a bit of patronage or something, or mentorship. And there was like, there's things that, there's not always a budget for the rock band. The more people you have, the more expensive it is to just do the logistics. So, she had a lot of opportunities and she wanted to take advantage of them. And she also wanted me to like, come help with the logistics and the touring and the driving and all that stuff. And she also wanted to like show people what I do. And, when you talk about Lydia, she considers herself a writer first and foremost, and she, in a way, thinks the music is secondary. She considers herself a poet and a writer. So the words are the most important thing to her. So in the case of our duo, Brutal Measures, it was basically like her spoken word with the added dimension of my confrontational drumming and electronics and presence and stuff like that. So I think it was just a thing that could happen and happened, and we don't really do it anymore. I just feel like it's kind of played its course. She still does spoken word, but the brutal, honestly, to be truthful, I found it extremely challenging and almost difficult because I felt like people were always there to see the Lydia Lunch, say the Lydia Lunch type things. And then who's this guy like beating the shit out of the drums next to her? I always felt like a little bit of an add-on, and she would beg to differ, but that's the cheerleading part of Lydia. So, I mean, yes, I can play the shit out of the drums and it's pretty crazy. And there's not a lot of people who do what I do, but I also think solo drumming is a bit, it's very tough. I don't find it to be very fulfilling musically as a listener or a performer. So I approached it as almost kind of like a freak show. Like, here's me going totally bonkers and just going nuts. So I don't know. It was a challenging format actually for me. And she laughs at me. She's like, "Oh, I thought this was going to be like the easiest thing you ever did." And I'm like, "No." And she's just, she finds it ironic that I found it one of the most challenging things to do, but I stuck with it because I wanted to see like where it could go and what we could do. And we played a lot of concerts, and, like, I think it's run its course at this point, but it was an interesting project for a while. So.
Now, you talk about dealing with the logistics of a band. I wanted to talk about how you're currently juggling both Retrovirus and Flying Luttenbachers and how that's been treating you. As since their reformation, there's quite a big tour right before COVID, I believe, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not that hard, as you probably realize. I've always had multiple bands going on pretty much at all times. And right now I'm embarrassed to say I'm in the least bands I've ever been in at one time in my adult life. I don't like this. That's kind of how it is. And I don't lose sleep over it. But I do believe that it's time to make better work, like less work, and make that work better. So I'm actually okay with it. I really am trying to make the Flying Luttenbachers surpass what it's done in the past, and concentrating on it is a good thing. So, I mean, really, Retrovirus is, we play when there's an offer for us to play. So it's not really a band that rehearses or, we're not really actively booking any tours currently or anything like that. But, like when we have a good opportunity to play, we go and we just burn the place down, and that's what we do. So that's not really like a huge commitment to me. I have to kind of show up and plug in the guitar and do it. It's not that big of a deal. So, Flying Luttenbachers, I would say the music's not quite as rehearsal intensive as it has been at different points. It's more about this like modernism in action, like these big dissonant modernist kind of constructions I'm doing. So I don't know. I've got good musicians. We practice. We are working on stuff. We should be hopefully getting a gig this month and kind of launching the new band. I just have to organize that. But Cellular Chaos, another band I've been in for a long time, that kind of has come and gone, but there's little murmurs of us playing again. We did our first gig in 3 years last month, and it went off famously. It went really well. So we live in different states, half the bands, so logistics are a little tough. So I don't know. Right now, my main thing is doing the Flying Luttenbachers in Chicago and getting this thing up to speed and really having a killer band, and then going out there and slaying everybody. When Lydia has a gig, she calls me. Cellular Chaos, might play every once in a while. I do some improvised music stuff here and there. I don't know. I run the record label, and I have a family, and I'm pushing 50, so there's I got crap I got to do. So it's not necessarily the most prolific time in my career, but I'm not bugging out about it. I think if I would have been in this position 10 years ago, I would have been just actually I was freaking out 10 years ago. So I don't know. I think there's the old feral Weasel Walter is like a Pygmalion thing, I kind of learned how to, button up my shirt and, just breathe, Weasel, relax. You can handle this, I don't know. I've learned a lot of things the hard way, and I think I'm at a pretty good point in my life. I've come through on the other end of a lot of crazy stuff. So, I still have my motivation, and I'm still into being totally nuts and making extreme art. That's just how I want to do it. So, I don't need excessive turmoil in my personal life. That's not really a goal. That's not really the
Probably for the better.
Yeah, it's not really necessary for me to have turmoil in my life to make great music. In fact, I don't think that was ever really the point. I guess I have just who I am. I guess I have some kind of inner conflict of some sort, which I'm still working on trying to figure out what that is that motivates me. But I don't think once we figure that out, my music's just going to go down the drain. I'm going to lose my motivation. I mean, I do what I do, and I like being iconoclastic. I like making music that nobody else makes. That's my job. That's what I do. I love to do it. So.
Yeah, you talked about being, fortunate enough to work alongside some of the people you listened to in your younger years and kind of looked up to. I was just curious, another pioneer of the no wave scene. I figure you must have crossed paths with him at least once, but have you ever worked with James Chance, or as I like to call him, James White?
You can call him Ray, or you can call him Jay, or you can call him Larry. Yes, Mr. James Siegfried from Brookfield, Wisconsin. Yes, with a banjo on his knee. No, I have not worked with him. I'm acquainted with many members of his early bands, but I have not worked with him personally. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with him. He's a weird guy. I think he was always weird, but he hasn't gotten less weird through the ages. I feel a little bad for him. His partner Judy finally died, I guess, a couple of years ago, and I think he's not doing so great. I think he really depended on her to be his anchor in reality. So I get the feeling that James Chance is not doing so great right now, but the early Contortions records were huge influence on me sonically. I mean, I never stylistically, maybe not, but there was something about it that was so insane. Let me tell you a funny story about the Contortions. Okay, so I had read about the Contortions in books, and I'd read about No New York, and I was like, hey, this no wave stuff, this is up my alley. I got to find this. So I'd been reading about these records, James White and the Blacks, and off White and by Contortions. And I was just like, oh, I got to find these records. And I was probably 15 years old, and I walked into the record store, and there was both of them used for $3-4 each. And I took them to the counter, and my dad kind of looked at them, and he was just like shaking his head. I mean, there are all these weird people on the back of the James White and the Blacks record, and he's just like, what the hell is this? And then he looks at the cover of By Contortions, and he looks at the woman on it and goes, is this a guy? Is that an Adam's apple? And I was just like, I found out later who the person on the cover of the record is. It's a deceased dominatrix from the New York scene named Terrence Sellers. And I was just thinking to myself, I joked later on about it. I was like, yeah, Dad, this woman would probably karate chop you in your Adam's apple if she heard you say that. So, you better watch out there. But, the twain was never two shall meet. So it did not happen. But I think when my dad saw those records, his eyebrow kind of went up, and he's like, oh God, what's this stuff? And, my parents tolerated all that racket coming out of my room, and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and let me be. So,
I know he's been up this way in quite a while. I mean, I would love to catch any formation that he's in, but Sax Maniac to me was the album. Like, oh man.
Okay. I think that some people's best work is not their favorite work or intended to be their best work. And I think the Contortions might be one of these types of bands, because I think, I don't think he liked the original band very much. I think he thought it was rather primitive. And as we saw him go towards a slicker sort of presentation, that would make sense. However, a lot of people pined for the original Contortions, and there were a lot of people imitating that band and influenced by that band. So I think later on, by the mid 90s, he was doing reunions of the original band, just because there seemed to be a demand for that aesthetically. For me, by like 1982, I'm not so interested in his music anymore. I actually do like the black funk backing bands that he had in 1980 and 1981. I think those bands were incredible, like Live in New York on Roar and that kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of those guys played with Ornette Coleman, stuff like that. And those were pretty deep bands. As far as like the New York tradition of like that kind of out funk stuff, I mean, those bands were like killing it. I've met a bunch of those guys. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, James had a really good run. My attitude is like, if somebody makes one good song, I'll listen to it. Yay. You know what I mean? Like, I don't expect most people to be super awesome their entire career. I mean, most people, they can't sustain it, or maybe what you like about them is not what they like about it. And that's not the thing that they want to do. So I don't know. I think I'm pretty consistent in this regard. I mean, if somebody likes what I do, I might have a momentary lapse where people are like, huh? But then I'm always kind of back with the program, because it's really, I know what I like, and that's what I do. And I'm very self-critical, and I try to like stay on top of the aesthetic, not like bumbling through it, like accidentally doing cool stuff every once in a while. So I don't know. I guess I'm really self-conscious in that regard.
Now, I think you've proven your chops as far as the Roland S. Howard covers go. I was just curious about the Pop Crimes shows that Lydia Lunch had played at, and if there was ever a chance for you to attend with her and play any of those.
Oh gosh, I mean, I actually think when she was doing those, we weren't really like working together at that point or communicating very much. So I think that was just, I don't know that she put those together. I feel like she was contracted to do that. Like somebody had the concept and they're like, oh, let's call Lydia Lunch to do this. And she like took the gig because they offered her the money or whatever. And from what I remember, she had a good time and it was all well and good. But I don't know, with
she couldn't weasel you on, so to speak.
Like whatever. I mean, people have different agendas, with iconic people like Lydia Lunch. Sometimes these people have their own designs, they want to put themselves on stage with the great Lydia Lunch, and that's all well and good. I don't really have a problem with that. I feel like did Harry Howard or somebody have something to do with that? Or I don't
Yeah,
really remember.
he was definitely there. I don't know about arranging it, but he was there and performed for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. He's nice. We hung out with him some years ago, and is a charming individual. I mean, it's really cool to meet these sort of rock trivia people that were always in the periphery. You know, like I really get off on that because I've always been a real dork about the details, and to meet somebody like Michael Zilka, the guy who ran ZE Records, like that kind of blew my mind. I was like, holy shit. I'm like sitting having dinner with Michael Zilka, or like I could think of a million people. I mean, I like, with Lydia, there's so many of these peripheral characters in the background. That's part of the fun for me as a rock trivia guy, is like meet all these people whose names I saw in liner notes and stuff like that. I mean, I could get really geeky about that, but it's pretty arcane, and I think most people who would listen to this podcast would just be like, who are you talking about? But it's beside the point. I do like lists of names, and I like obscure people who did like one cool thing. Pretty into that. So, it's been pretty interesting in that regard. Yes.
I was wondering, do you have any amusing stories of touring up here in the Great White North of Canada?
Take off, you hoser. Let's see. Oh God, the problem with the stories thing is that my mind is not so linear at this point, and I would say there, in the hard drive that I call my brain, it's fragmented somewhat. So, for me to remember specific things usually might take somebody who was there sort of jogging my memory and kind of making those connections for me. I mean, I have people like that in my life. I mean, the bass player from Retrovirus, Tim Dahl, I mean, that guy, I wouldn't say he's got a photographic memory, but he remembers a lot. And usually there's been so much mayhem on tour that usually he can be like, oh, do you remember like at this one gig in Montreal that this happened and then this happened, and I'll start to like see the glimmer of it off in the distance, and it'll start to come like a little more clear. But
The haze.
dude, where do we start? I mean, I spent the last 30 years just hauling ass, like running just straight forward momentum the whole time, and I never stopped and smelled the roses. Like I didn't really look back. So a lot of the stuff just came and went. I mean, oh my God. I mean, Canada, oh yeah, we've had all kinds of wacky stuff happen. I mean, honestly, there's one thing I kind of want to tell you, but I can't name the people personally. There's nobody you would have even heard of anyways, but basically, okay, let me think. Where did this happen? This might have actually happened in Toronto, come to think of it. We were staying with a woman who was promoting, who had promoted Lydia's shows like sort of throughout the decade or whatever. And she's cool. And she's also a very weird, idiosyncratic person. And at the time, she was going out with this guy that was so insane. I mean, he was like a pathological liar, and we were just in tears of laughter watching this guy like just lie through his teeth about the most insane things. Like, why would you even say that? Like, I'm not going to be specific, but like it's the kind of person who would come up to you and say, oh yes, my father invented aluminum foil or some bullshit like that. Like, I mean, this guy was so far out. It turned into a huge joke over the night of seeing like what we could get him to like just conjure these insane things. I mean, he had all these insane scenarios that we knew were total bullshit. We were just in tears of laughter the whole time. I don't know. I mean, the things that are funny that happen sometimes are very specific to the people who are involved and whatever insanity they're, like the Retrovirus crew is, for example, we like to keep it together, like we like to have fun, but we got to like get it to the next gig, and we got to try not to crash the rental van, and we got to play the songs well, and you know what I mean? We can't really just be train wrecks, I mean, there's a time to have fun, and then there's a time to like get the job done. So, in the case of Retrovirus, most of the time we we get the job done, but then when it's time to like unwind, it can get real wacky depending on who our company is. So, man, there's plenty of crazy things have happened in Canada, but I can't really. I would have to look at my notes, or there's just so much has happened. I don't. It's like I can't.
Right, we're doing a
hard to hold
follow-up
on to
episode.
everything.
It's all about
Yeah.
Canada.
I mean, I don't want to sound jaded because I'm really not, but a lot of the clubs tend to just like run together after a while, and you meet like thousands of people, and then they come up like 15 years later and they're like, do you remember me? We stayed up all night talking. It was so great. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure we did, but I don't really remember you, but what's your name? Like I'm not very aloof. In fact, some people would say I would talk to a brick wall. So, like, whatever, like I said, I don't really have much of a rock star trip as far as these things go. But I do know that my brain is not a steel trap, and I acknowledge that. And I try to be upfront about that. So, good question.
Thank you. Now, being such a multi-instrumentalist, what's the go-to instrument for writing?
That is a great question. In fact, I think somebody would want to hear the answer to that. Yeah, there's a bunch of different methods, really, a limited number, I would say. It depends on what kind of music I'm trying to write. If I'm trying to write something complex with a lot of notes, usually it behooves me to kind of hack away in MIDI, because I can get quick results, and I can audition things and like really fine tune things very quickly. And, it's basically like MIDI programming is like having a whole orchestra at your fingertips. And yes, it sounds like a computer playing music, unless if you put a lot of elbow grease into it. But for me, as a composer, it can be a very useful tool to really just refine things, maybe complex relationships in music very quickly. So the MIDI thing, like an example of that would be Flying Luttenbachers records like Incarceration by Abstraction. I mean, all that stuff was pretty much written in MIDI, and it was just like made to be as complex and unplayable as humanly possible. I'm sure somebody could play that stuff, but you wouldn't find me learning that stuff. I played it once for the record, and that was quite enough. Actually, some of the bands did play a few songs off that record before it broke up. The band with Ed Rodriguez, actually, we did play a few of those songs, but yeah, for the really hard stuff, MIDI is the way to go. I write a lot of songs where I have a motif in my head, and it's more
on a motif.
So yes, I might have just like an idea, like I want a song that does this, or works this way, or accomplishes this goal, or has this kind of dynamic. And in that sense, it's more about the structure and what effect it's trying to achieve. So it's not so much necessarily about the notes and the harmonies or anything like that specifically. So in the case of a song like Omnicide on the last Luttenbachers record, or there was a long track called Mutation on Shattered Dimension. I could name a bunch of songs like this. To me, they're kind of a post-Teenage Jesus and the Jerks language, and it's more about how they're constructed, and rather than I've got to sit and work out all this like detailed stuff. So in the sense of songs like that, I literally am just thinking, oh, I want a part that does this, and then I want a part that does this thing, and then I want this to happen. It's like those two songs were written on napkins in like 2 minutes or whatever, because I just thought, the members can flesh out the rest of the details. It doesn't even matter. A lot of my work is really dissonant, so I might figure out some kind of bizarre tonality that I want to use with it, but usually that can be pretty arbitrary, and I can just kind of make that up really quick and stick with it. For me, composition is like having a little bit of material or a little bit of an idea, and then like sort of blossoming the idea into a bigger work or whatever. So I can kind of work arbitrarily with almost any material and come up with something, because the way I think, I think the material is arbitrary. The process, there's a million ways you can work with material, and I guess just as a composer, I'm comfortable with pursuing that. So I don't know. I can get an idea from like the weirdest places, you know, like really bad pop songs on the radio from the 70s or something. I might like one chord change in some horrible song that stinks, but like that one chord change, I'm like, oh, I can make a whole song out of that. Or, you know, like the album The Void by the Flying Luttenbachers was this case exactly, because there had been some complaints about the previous album, Systems Emerge from Complete Disorder, and these people were saying that, oh, it's too complicated, blah, 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 it's too complex. I was like, oh, really? Okay, well, I'm going to make the dumbest album I can make, and it's still going to be too complex for you, but it's going to be basically laughing at you because it's going to be the same song over and over, and you're not even going to realize it. So basically, I had maybe like 5 different motives that I was using to write the whole album. And the main chord progression, which is sort of this descending chord pattern, I was trying to think again recently where I got that, and I got it from this song by The Babies, which was John Waite's band before he was a solo artist, called Isn't It Time? It's like this chord progression that happens right before the chorus. And I was just like, I love this part. So I basically wrote a whole album out of that one chord progression, you know, and a few other things here and there. So, you know, the idea of taking a small amount of material and transforming it in a lot of different ways is a very efficient way of approaching composition. And it gives continuity and it gives limitations, and you know, it's helpful. Sometimes I pick up a guitar and I just write a chord progression. Sometimes I hear something in my head and then I write it down. You know, it's kind of like any way that works is fine. So I don't know. I could probably give people, you know, this, I'm giving people free advice on how to compose, and you know, if anyone has any questions, I mean, feel free to ask. It's not magic. It is it's just a deliberate way of looking at processes, I guess, you know.
The Flying Luttenbachers, all instrumental.
Yeah.
Do you write lyrics? Does that ever come to you?
No. My Achilles heel is vocal melodies and lyrics. I just don't express myself that way. I leave it to the pros, and I've worked with some heavy ones. I mean, one of my favorite writing partners of all time is Admiral Gray from Cellular Chaos. I mean, she is so brilliant and she's so good at so many things. You know, that's an actual songwriting team, like a Lennon and McCartney thing, because a lot of the times I'll just come up with the music, I'll have the whole thing done, I'll hand it off to Admiral Gray, and she'll come in and she'll just nail it, she'll kill it, she'll come up with something totally awesome and bizarre, great melodies, like memorable everything. And I just feel so fortunate because that's like the one thing I can't really do. So, you know, it's really cool to work with, you know, people that can do that. And, you know, I like to collaborate, so that's a good thing. I've worked with some pretty interesting vocalists and singers, so I just leave it to the pros, honestly.
So we're not going to see you duetting Dun Dun with Lydia Lunch anytime in the future.
You're definitely not, but I have been. I mean, one of my predilections is that I do love karaoke, and I will fucking burn shit down to the ground. Like, watch me. Like, I'll do it good too. I have very good relative pitch. I can sing. I just don't really. That's not something I do professionally. You know, I sing for fun. I don't really. It's not something that I would ever pursue. Well, at least not up to this point. But I could see it would be perverse for me to be a lead singer in a band. It would definitely be something that people hadn't seen coming. And I wouldn't rule it out, but I haven't seen a format where I thought that would be something to do. Honestly, writing lyrics is a mystery to me. Whenever I've written lyrics, I look at them and I just go, these suck, these are stupid. And it's just like over, you know? I don't know how people commit to it, but then again, I guess people don't know how I commit to a chord progression or a melody or something like that. So, you know, I guess it's just, you know, I try to do everything, but that's just my weakness. I can't really do it. I don't get it. So.
Now, I wanted to ask you about the title, ugEXPLODE. Now, This may be me projecting. you clarify. Now, when I see UG, the only thing I think of is LSD, like microgrammage and the dosage for LSD. Was that at all involved in the title, or is that
No, but I love it. I'm gonna run with that. No, no, it isn't. I like that. Micrograms, yeah, sure. No, it's a non sequitur, but what it was originally meant to be was ugh was the last thing you said before your head exploded. So it's kind of like a tone poem or some kind of dada like approach to an event or something. I mean, really it was just me with a sheet of letraset, kind of like making a logo or whatever. And it's just a non sequitur that I came up with. So I don't know. It's like, my given name, my birth name is not Weasel. And I think of things like this, like the name the Flying Luttenbachers and the label ugEXPLODE and the name Weasel Walter, as just these like things, these like placeholders that I don't even like the name of Flying Luttenbachers. Like I think I kind of hate that name, but it's like 30 years in, it's like my brand. I kind of can't get away from it. So I just see it as like a non sequitur. It's not really that meaningful to me. It's just, well, you got to call it something. So there it is. The choices we make when we're 19 years old are not necessarily the choices we would make at age 49. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough, but once the brand is built.
Yeah, well, there's continuity. I would say there's definitely continuity in my work, but I've definitely tried to refine it on many levels, and I think I've succeeded at that, and I'm not done yet. So we'll see where this goes.
All right, I wanted to ask, talking about ugEXPLODE, are we going to see any vinyl re-releases of either of those Retrovirus albums or the early Flying Luttenbachers stuff?
With the case of the Lydia lunch stuff, that was the initial Retrovirus CD was licensed to to a few different labels in Europe. So that had been pressed on vinyl a few times. I don't know if it will be repressed anytime soon. I don't know that Lydia even cares about that, frankly. I mean, if somebody offered her money, yeah, she would license it, but otherwise she doesn't really care about reissuing that stuff because it's kind of out there. And Urge to Kill was on vinyl too. Like it was licensed to a label in Europe. The early Luttenbacher stuff, honestly, I'm not crazy about it enough to want to do that. And also there's band members involved that I don't really feel like, on one hand, I don't feel like this is my record, I'm just going to do what I want, because I almost feel like I should be approaching the people on the record who are still alive if they are still alive, and just out of courtesy, because if somebody put out a record I was on and kind of like didn't ask me, I think I would feel kind of weird about it. So I just put myself in their shoes. But there's people in the old band that I'm not really that interested in like bringing that discussion up with. So, I think like there's enough copies of that stuff out there. To me, it's like my high school cover band or something. It's not mature work to me. And although it may have its charms, I'm not really, I guess I'm more interested in what's next rather than rehashing what's old. I've always kind of thought that way. I mean, I was always conscientious of my journey, whatever that was as a musician, and where I left all my markings and all that stuff. But I think that's pretty well established at this point, considering that I'm on like 225 records or something insane like that. So I don't have the same desperation about documenting everything that maybe I once had. So I don't know. I feel like those records are out there. They exist on vinyl. They exist on CDs. They exist as files, like whatever. I don't know. I would, if somebody wanted to do some kind of big project and put a budget to it and wanted to deal with the wrangling of the ex-members, I could see doing it, but I don't really want to deal with it. So
the years that you've had the Flying Luttenbachers going, when do you feel the peak lineup was?
I think the peak lineup was probably 2006, when, like 2005, 2006, which was basically the band that made the record Cataclysm. The band with Ed Rodriguez and Mick Barr, or the guy that replaced Mick Barr, Rob Pumpelly, and Mike Green from Burmese, like that was a pretty smoking band. We were pretty ambitious, and everybody was kind of with the program, and we really had it together. I have to say that I recently released a full-length live video by that band, shot with multiple, albeit primitive, cameras. It's multi-track audio, and it's called Live Cataclysm, and I have that on DVD. Actually, it's I think it's a great document of that band at its peak, you know, just like crushing it live. And I have to say that that was the right band at the wrong time. It seemed like the better we got, the less people were interested in it, or maybe I didn't play it right, or maybe we should have went and toured more, or I don't know what happened, but it just felt like as that band got more and more complex and interesting, people got less and less interested in it, and it was getting kind of bleak, and it was really bumming me out. I took it very personally, existentially, and really towards the end, I was having like kind of nervous breakdowns about it on stage. And at one point, Ed Rodriguez, bless his heart, you know, he's gone on to fame and fortune with Deerhoof. He comes up to me and he goes, "Weasel, dude, you got to give this a rest. It's done." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." And that was it. And then I kind of like went and made the Incarceration by Abstraction album, which was going to be the next phase, which was even crazier. I did it basically by myself, and then I called it a day for 10 years. So that was kind of the arc of the whole thing. I just felt like I was just hitting a wall with it, really. And it did need to have a break. And now I do feel recharged about it. Like it has a new meaning, and it has new momentum and new possibilities. So that's the only reason why. Trust me, for a long time I had offers and people were like, "Oh, bring back the Flying Luttenbachers," and I kind of just kept shaking my head going, nah, not gonna happen. Like, it's not, I'm not gonna do this until there's a meaning and until there's an actual reason to do it, because it's not something, it's, you know, the legacy of the band is something I don't want to take a piss on just to like go get a paycheck, you know. It's not really that interesting to me. So it's like the band's only going to be a band if there's something I want to do that I believe fits with the continuity and the concept of the Flying Luttenbachers. And I think last 4 records are pretty strong, and I think the best ones are yet to come. So I think Negative Infinity is the best Flying Luttenbachers album. I mean, somebody might have a sentimentality for one of the old ones, but come on, man, put that fucking thing on it. It's kind of like blowing away all those other records. I don't know. That's just my opinion. I'm not necessarily a guy who thinks my newest record's always the best one either. So I'm pretty well grounded in that regard. But you know, there's good things to come. I'm gonna keep stepping it up, definitely.
Any chance we're gonna see you on this side of the border at all in the near future?
I certainly hope so. We are talking about doing a show in Ottawa at a festival. Well, actually, I kind of confirmed it in November. What is this thing called? Hold on a second. This was posed to me a while back, and I took it. So we're probably going to tour from Chicago to Ottawa and back. So we'll probably do, hopefully, a few gigs in Canada, but I have to get on my booking agent and get this going. It's called the, what's it called? The IMMO. What does that stand for? Sorry, this is awkward.
No problem. I'm on the west end of the country anyway.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. It's like it's in Ottawa, and it's like an improvised music festival. But the guy has funding, and he wanted the Flying Luttenbachers, and I said, yeah, sure. I mean, in the past, Canada has been a bit of a pain in the ass as far as border crossings and visas and all that kind of crap. But it's been explained to me that the terms are maybe slightly different now as far as getting in the country, and a band, you know, like if you're not making a certain amount of money, you don't need a visa or something like that. So I don't know. We have to work out the logistics on it. But yeah, the border between Canada and America has always been kind of a hassle, even though the shows are generally pretty good in Canada. Like we usually have a pretty good time. So I don't know. I think, yeah, I'm optimistic about it. You know, we're going to be working with a booking agent again in the US, and I'm sure they'll have the connections, and you know, we want to get out there and pound the pavement. So yeah.
Well, I know that conversion rate is a tricky thing too. You come in and it works real well, but then everything you make is our plastic funny money, and it's real no good when you head back across the border.
You know, there's all kinds of games that can be played. I don't really sweat it ahead of time. I mean, you know, you need money to eat and pay bills and stuff like that, but money has never been the like primary motivation of any of this crap. I mean, of course you need it, and it's good to make it. And I am pretty proud to say that I've run Weasel Walter Enterprises I haven't run it at a loss in a long time. And that's amazing, because what I do is very uncommercial. It's very DIY. It's basically one dude sitting in an office packing orders and like laying out stuff and doing the shipping and receiving, and you know, like that's me basically. So it's a lot of work, but honestly, I'm almost grateful it's at a small scale, because I feel like if it got bigger, I couldn't handle it, honestly. And there's a point where I'm not a control freak, but I feel like the consistency of my catalog and my output has a lot to do with me doing most of the work and not having other people fuck it up. So that's kind of my attitude, is like DIY. Part of doing it yourself is doing it right. And I'm proud of what I've done. And if it stays at a small scale, fine. If it stays like this, I have no problem with that, because I can handle it, and I get to make the records I want to make, and I kind of get to do the stuff I want to do. I'm not complacent, but I'm glad for what I have, and I count my blessings. So, you know.
As we near the end of the interrogation here, I have
that was easy. You call that an interrogation? Come on, man. That's a piece of cake. Go ahead.
I have a common question I like to ask everybody. I know you said most clubs blend together after a time, but I always like to throw it out there to find out, what was the worst bathroom at any venue that you played?
Oh boy, jeepers, that does not narrow it down. You know, the first thing that comes to the top of my head is I do not care for the so-called Turkish toilet in the south of France. I find that barbaric and somewhat terrifying proposition, because it is literally two places to put your feet and a hole in the ground. And I know the physics work out somehow, but man, I really try to avoid using that thing at all possible. I'm not ready to go back to the Stone Ages and, you know, try to poop in a hole. It's just not my vibe. So I don't know. I think that off the top of my head is probably the first answer. I don't know. I mean, I've done everything. I've done opera houses to horrible tin shacks in the middle of Florida and everything in between. I paid my dues, and I've done a lot of shows under very horrible conditions, but that was just part of what had to be done. I don't yearn to go back to those kind of conditions. You know, I'm older. Like, I don't want to use, I kind of don't want to sleep on a dirt floor using a cinder block for a pillow in like 100-degree weather. You know, like, I don't really want to do that anymore. I have done that, particularly in the middle of Florida in the summer. And once again, it's about like counting your blessings and be glad for what you have. I mean, I did a lot of things the hard way, and where I'm at now, I do not yearn to redo some of these things the hard way. I'll put it like that. So.
Well, I must admit that's the first time that answer has gone international. It's almost always a North American shitty puddle-infested venue that someone's talked about, but you're going to the heart
South
of
of France.
southern
South
France.
of France. South of France is a wild place. It's I like that place. I mean, it's pretty wild, but yeah, that does not fly with me. It's no good. The Luttenbachers do not fly with the Turkish toilet.
All right. Who are some of the heavy hitters under the ugEXPLODE catalog that you're pushing right now?
Oh, well, the three new releases are fairly heavy, I believe. I mean, the new Flying Luttenbachers record, Terror Iridescence, is 44 minutes of nightmare, bizarre abstraction, and it's out on CD and download now, and it'll be out on LP through our friends at God Records in Austria by September, hopefully. And we have a CD by an international trio featuring myself on drums, the iconoclastic saxophonist Martin Escalante, who is, he starts where Albert Eiler and Arthur Doyle and all these guys end. That's where he starts. He's a maniac, and a South American bass player called Tete Leguia, who is playing some kind of bizarre prepared bass that I've never seen anybody do before. So it's basically, it sounds like a jazz trio, but it's basically us taking our instruments as far as they can go in terms of reinventing the way of playing. So I think it's fairly unique music, and it's definitely bracing. It's not your grandma's jazz, let's put it that way. So there's that, and then the third release is a professionally manufactured duplicated CDR by a trio of myself, Tim Dahl on bass, and Elliot Sharp on guitar. And that is a sort of like a lost studio session that we did about 10 years ago, and I recently recovered it and thought it was good, so we mixed it and we put it out. And it's Elliot Sharp doing a whole lot of skronky, crazy, noisy guitar. It might be one of the noisiest things he's done in quite a while. And me and Tim Dahl are I think we're a pretty good rhythm section for that kind of thing. So yeah, it's more of a fun archival release. So, I kind of like rate the scale of these things, and think about how many copies I'm going to sell, and then I kind of make them whatever format they need to be to kind of fulfill it, because it's a low budget operation. So so those are the three new releases.
Now, I know you had just said that you had those three coming out, and that God Records from Austria was putting out the one. Now, did I see a post on ugEXPLODE that it said if you're a non-US resident, it would be better in your interest to order from God Records?
Yeah, because the ridiculousness of the mandates within the past few years of the United States Postal Service has become so utterly untenable. At this point, if you do it the right way, it costs you about $14 to send a CD, a frickin' CD, outside of the US, which is basically like, you might as well just kill my business right there. I found a loophole. I'm not going to say what it is. I did find a loophole, luckily, and that's the only reason why I can charge $4 for for shipping of a CD outside of the US. But in the case of LPs, there's no way to cheat it. I mean, you're talking like I mean, you know, you're in Canada. You're actually doing worse than most other places as far as getting an LP from US. I know it's like $24 or something insane like that. So, you know, in the case of you know, these LPs, I mean, I licensed the old Luttenbachers LPs to an Italian label called Improved Sequence, and I do the new records with God Records in Austria. And yeah, I mean, it might be cheaper for Canadians to order it from Austria and Italy than it is the US. This is like a total joke. It's pathetic, but you know, if you've seen what's been happening in our country the last, you know, like 5-6 years, I mean, it makes perfect sense. We had a fucking asshole, like wannabe dictator, you know, even more blatantly than normal as a president. And I mean, the nepotism, like the idiots that he installed in these like crucial positions, it's like a freaking joke, you know, and we're still reeling from it. We still have this like all this idiocy going on, you know, and then, I mean, don't even get me started. I mean, whatever, man. The reason why we're Americans is because they wind us up, you know, like when you know, like if you're going to have dog fights, you like kind of like fuck with the dog's face to make it mean. That's like Americans, like they just fuck with our faces to make us mean, so that we're like, you know, like really vicious. And you know, I guess like that kind of rage in American culture, like US culture, is something that some people can relate to in some kind of like fetishistic degree, but I'm not sure that's such a like great thing ultimately. And this is why my music is a Black humor representation of this kind of aggression. It is not literal. It is a sort of surrealist Black humor commentary on male and or US type, the aggressiveness of the psyche of these archetypes. You know, being that I am a male from the United States, I sure look like one of these people. But you know, to me, all my music is psychodramatic. There is usually something else going on below the surface, and I play a caricature of myself on stage most of the time. You know, it's based on reality, but it's hyper amplified to put across this kind of meta text that I'm trying to get across, that there's an irony to all of this stuff. So some people have said, well, why don't you, if you hate America so much, why don't you leave it? And it's just like, but I am an American. It's like, if I go anyplace else, it's so painfully obvious. And even though I am probably contrarian and I don't agree with a lot of the status quo in the United States, I still feel like I came out of that ferment, and it's more important for me to be here and be like a resistance factor than it is for me to bail and go like look for some easier life elsewhere. So I'd like to think that I'm offering some kind of resistance or counterpoint to the asinine like machinations of the United States status quo and this like stupid, idiotic moron group thinking that's going on here. I think it's important to have ethics and integrity and be fair and work hard and know your motivation and try to have a clear vision for everything. Frankly, I'm not a saint, but you know, I try very hard to, you know, toe the line and put my money where my mouth is and be fair and be a good person. So, you know, that's my attitude.
All right, lastly, to close out the episode, you've mentioned a few websites people can get your products from. Just lay out basically where it is people can go to support you and how they can do so.
Easy. I would say the main thing is go to weaselwalter.bandcamp.com, and that has a lot of my releases on it. And if they're in print, you can order the physical version. Otherwise, you can browse or download many dozens of items from my oeuvre. WeaselWalter.com is still a site, but I don't really update it very often. And I'm not even sure people look at crap like that anymore. Seems like it's ineffectual, but it's there. There's some data there. There's the sort of beginnings of my massive gig log there, which I have to complete at some point. The Flying Luttenbachers, the same thing. The FlyingLuttenbachers.com is another like half-dead website. So I don't know. I think like the most relevant thing is, you know, I'm pretty good at social media and I'm easily found there. And the Bandcamp page is kind of where you can go check stuff out. So, and there's too many videos of me on YouTube. It's like ridiculous. So whatever. It's outrageous, actually. Don't know. There's plenty of evidence. I seem to be a very well-kept secret, but there's a lot of evidence out there. And if people want to go down a wormhole, it's there. It's all there.
Well, I couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of everything you've been involved with. I mean, looking at your Discogs, it's a scroll like Wheel of Fortune scenario, looking through every band you've been a part of. So I just wanted to get a brief kind of feel for some of the main ones on the surface, I suppose, but I hope you enjoyed yourself, and perhaps we'll dig a little deeper in the future, and I want to hear some more Canadian stories if this ever happens. So
okay, you give me a little warning ahead of time, and I'll definitely come up with the goods, because I got to consult my people on this. So yeah, I got your back on it, sure.
All right, thank you very much for spending the night here. I know it's the Lord's Day and it's late over there.
I got one more sound for you. Oh. Take off, you hoser.
I love it.